I think it started. Hi, welcome to the class. It's called Writing Unconventional Characters. And we're going to start. This is the first of a series of 8 classes. I'm actually going to be doing them live with a course, with a group through writers.com. But this is one for you. So I will go through my slideshow. Kind of, since it's not a live class, it'll be a little different, but I wanted to share some of the content with you and some of the ideas and some of the prompts so that you can use it as you wish. Sound good? So I'm going to see if I can work out how to do a screen share. I think we should be fine. Here we go. And there we are. So yes, let's see. We can move that out of the way. Okay. So welcome. Um, if you've signed up for this or if you've wanted to do this course before, we tried to do it earlier this year, but it didn't happen for various reasons. But now we're doing it, and it's writing unconventional characters. And so what the goal is to make our characters really stand out, to be sort of unforgettable, so that we don't fall into the idea of tropes and archetypes and stereotypes. We want our characters to just um, be slightly different or hugely different, with some of the examples I'm going to be giving you today are sort of the extreme. But it gives us permission, by going to the extremes, it gives us permission to come back to a place that feels comfortable for our story and our characters, narrators, protagonists, and all of that. So we're going to start with that, okay? That's the goal. So one thing I want you to think about as we start this, as it's synchronous, I don't know how you say that. As you're doing this on your own time and you get to stop and start, um, stop this in a second and pull up some work that you would like to work on, so that you would like to focus on. And hopefully you've started a book, started a novel is what my main focus is, especially in this course. Pull up your novel that's a work in progress. Pull up some of the characters. Doesn't have to be linear, doesn't have to be chronological, but pull up a chapter that really captures one of your characters nicely, that you want to dive in and play with. And so each of these little prompts that I'm going to be giving you will give you ideas and directions to take your character and to play with it. And again, like everything in the world, if it fits for you, if it resonates, great. That's my hope. If it doesn't, that's great too. You know your story, you know the person that you are trying to write and trying to bring alive. So my hope today in this course is to give you some tools and some ways of looking at your narrator and your protagonists and think about how to describe them better. And so pull up those pieces of those works, some characters, and also I want you to think about, and if we were having the live class, we'd be talking about this now. What are your goals for this time together? So we have 8 weeks. There's going to be 8 sessions, and each session will go into a different aspect of this. And I'm not going to be too prescriptive. I'm not going to be too stuck on the progression. I mean, I have the lineup and you've read the description in the course sign up, but within that, we get to play with our own examples. So I want it to be interactive. Especially as a live class, we would be talking about what your goals are. We'd go around and everyone would say what your goals are. So since you're doing this at home on your own, I guess, just make some notes. Just pause the video and just think about what your goals are. And if you want, you can write to me, you can email me, because you've got a hold of me. In order to see this, you know who I am. So you can email me if you have specific questions at the end of this class, okay? And that would be the best place for you to say how I can help you. And also, having said that, I would like to encourage you to start picking up books that you have around the house that you love and the characters that you love, and pull out some paragraphs or some descriptions or some lines or some phrases, some lingering images from those characters, and save them, put them aside. And if ever we do talk to each other in person, you can bring them to the class and bring them into the conversation. Okay. So that's that. So the course is called Writing Unconventional Characters. What do I mean by unconventional? Well, what are conventions? They're the stereotypes. They're the narrative tropes. The storyline that you're like, oh yeah, I know that one. I know what's happening. She's about to find out that her husband's been cheating on her. Oh, she's just about to discover that her son has been taking drugs, or he's just discovered that he doesn't like his job anymore, but he's scared to stop it because he's now 45 and those are the tropes. Those are the standard stories, and readers at this point we're like kind of know what's coming, right? I mean, there is always the joy of we all describe it and go through it differently, but we want to those are the conventional stories. Those are the conventional characters. We want to make those are like the TV soaps. So put it that way. We want to make ours into like the novels that just like scream attention that you can't put down and you never forget. So that's what I mean by unconventional. So, like it says here on the screen, we want to consider how nationality, culture, class, gender, age, race, they all have their cultural expectations, right? They all have their things that we're meant to do that outside world looks at that person and expects and predicts. Our minds are predictive machines. That's kind of how we move through the world. So our minds are trying to predict what that person is going to do next. So by being unconventional, we put a little tension into our stories and it makes it a little more interesting because they didn't expect whatever it is that person does. I guess I should say, why should you listen to me? Well, I am my lifestyle and my story, my own stories, and then the stories, the novels I've written, the characters are definitely unconventional. Me, I'm in my late 50s. I have dreadlocks, tattoos. Right now, I'm living in Colorado in a little travel trailer. In winters, I travel down to Mexico. I've lived all over the States and Europe and Guatemala. I have about 8 novels out, and they all have very unconventional characters. One of them is androgynous. You don't know through the whole book what gender the narrator is, and because uh, like Jeanette Winterson, who's one of the examples we're going to be using today, who's obviously well more known than I am. She did a book in the 80s and the 90s, somewhere in there, that was the narrator was ungendered all the way through. But we'll get to that. So, anyways, that's what I write. That's what I do, and my books. People like my books, so that's why I'm sharing my skills with you. Okay, so one of the things I'm doing kind of a little introduction for you here before we dive into the specific topic of this week and the specific prompts. So we want to think about the also environmental expectations, right? Consider the different ways cultures affect the lives and the attitudes, the way people dress, the way people, what they drive, even what they do and how they live, according to whether they live rural, suburban, and urban. These lifestyles all have different expectations, right? So think about that as your settings, and think about the setting that you've chosen for your novel that you're writing, and think about how that affects your main character, and also any of the people that come in and affect your story. They all have their own history. So just spend a little bit of time thinking about, Margaret comes in and moves into the neighborhood, and she's from inner city Chicago, and now they're living in a small village in New Mexico, say. So she's going to have her own dynamic and her own expectations. And how does that fit in with the people that she's now interacting with that actually live there in New Mexico? So think about place, okay? So if we were in class now, we'd chat about our own different expectations, and just as a kind of out of interest, like who grew up where and what are the social expectations that you are feeling, that you've lived with as a kid, and then which ones have you continued as an adult when you have agency, which ones fit you and which ones didn't fit you. So have a little discussion. And or we can make it a writing prompts for you. Think about or write, just take a few moments, pause the video. Think about those questions like what were the social expectations placed on you as a kid, as a teenager, and at whatever age you are now? And play with that and just write some of them out. Because, I mean, my main thing is that if we don't know the conventions and we don't know the expectations and the social expectations and stereotypes that we're living unconsciously, how are we going to change and how are we going to write about all the rest of the world, or the rest of the interactions and potentials and possibilities, right? We want to get a little more conscious of what we're doing in our lives, what our characters are doing in their lives, and what the people in that world that we're creating. So just pause the video and just take a moment to sit with that and play with that, okay? I'm going to have a drink whilst you do that. So, yes, like I just mentioned, the goal here is we want to subvert the expectations just enough to make the reader pay more attention, to remember your character, your narrator, because they stand out. We don't, well, I mean, you can, but I'm thinking in this class for us, our goal isn't to write such whacked out characters that it takes people out of the story, that they're just so unexpected that they lose that world that they've dived into. We want them to be like, ah, interesting, as opposed to like, whoa, where did that come from? Right? So think about that as a goal. And you can also write your own goals as to what you would like from your character. How would you like your character to be remembered, really, right? Because that's what we want. We want people to be like, oh, remember when I read your book and Lucky? God, I loved Lucky. Lucky was great. Like I really connected with what Lucky went through and how they dealt with it, right? For example. So the course is an 8-week course. And over the course, we're going to also thoroughly we're going to talk about language, the way we say things, the way we write things, such as like adjectives, the words, we all speak differently. And that's partly our cultural backgrounds, our race, our age, our generations, right? So when you're writing the dialogue, especially, you really want to pay attention to this with the dialogue because each of us speaks differently. Each of us has our own rhythm, our own ups and downs and loops and tangents and phrases and catchphrases, right? So you want to think about that. We're going to also talk about presentation. Like I mentioned earlier, I definitely sit outside of what's expected for a middle class, white, educated woman from England. I do not fit that by looks, by choice, and also by how I move. Apparently, I use my hands a lot, as I'm noticing as I'm recording this. Context. Context is the environment. We want to talk about the environment, the setting, the physical landscape, the political landscape, archetypes. There's always archetypes. Even I notice this even as I travel around a lot and I move and live in different parts of the country and different parts of the world. So often I'll meet someone, I'll be like, oh, you remind me of Jim, right? You, with there are people that, without being like stereotypes bad, but there are stereotypes, archetypes good. I mean, there's a fine line. So there are things that hold true in lots of different places and that will remind us of different people and different places. So think about archetypes. You know, there's always like the American language because I'm living in the States right now, like the OCD person that's always, everything's got to be perfectly clean and wipe this and do that and wash hands every single time they touch anything. And so think about those archetypes. There's the person that comes into a room and it just has big energy and fills the room, even if they're not saying anything. We all kind of notice them, right? We all kind of be like, uh-huh. So there's the fool, there's the intellect. So think of archetypes as well. And just take a moment to kind of think about your main character, and is there an archetype for that character? Do they fit a certain archetype? And if they do, write down that archetype and just a couple of the characteristics for that archetype, because that will, again, make you more conscious of choices that you can make further down. And that way you can subvert that archetype. And actions and reactions. We all have different ways of acting and reacting. Some people you say, I say something and it's like I'm walking on eggshells because they'll get super defensive immediately and take it the wrong way. There's other people that always see the worst in the world and always notice what's wrong, and then there are those that always notice what's right. So things like that, worth we'll be going into in way more detail later on. I also want to talk quickly about feedback protocol. So in the actual group, when we're doing the live course, and if this becomes a online thing where we're submitting to like wet ink, say wet.ink, or one of those sources where we can send in work and assignments and we give each other feedback. If that's the case, this is the feedback protocol. So I'll be giving us a lot of prompts, a lot of short things to write and to play with, and share new scenes or work on characters and write without editing, just like write, get it out, and then we move on to the next thing. And so, say someone has just read what they just wrote, read a new piece, and it's unedited and it's raw and it's fresh. We're going to be nice. We are going to be kind. And we're going to talk about what we noticed. I'm going to reflect back any patterns we noticed. We're going to mention any lingering images or phrases that really stick to us. We are also going to talk about where we got lost or where we got confused in those passages or pages. And lastly, we're going to leave on the strengths. We're going to leave on what we wanted more of, what they did really well that we wanted more of. Okay. So that's the way I like to do workshops, and I like to do workshop feedback. We just have like these 3, 4 points to think about. No tangents, no negativity. We're here to support each other. We're here to encourage each other and to boost each other. So let's be kind and generous in our words. So, week 1, playing with identity. I would like us to talk a little bit about identity. And I'll start by giving you some definitions and some ideas, and then I'll give you some writing projects to do, okay? So what exactly is identity? So in psychology, it says here, quote, identity is defined as a person's subjective sense of self that persists over time. It's that core understanding we have of ourselves and who we are, how we interact with the world, how we want the world to interact with us. It's that internal question. It answers the internal question of who am I and how do I fit into the world? And we'll go into this in a different tangent in a different week about the idea of fitting in and belonging from Dr. Brene Brown, and the different ideas of that and how that alone can be a great tool to use when we're doing the character development. Okay, so think about, you can even do a little free writing with your character of like, who am I and how do I fit into the world? So identity is also considered that through line of, as Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, again, online source, when I was looking up definitions and nice, concise ways to explain this, it's that sameness over time. And so you see the photo of me there, a lot tidier, to be honest, a little 5-year-old me. So who was I as a 5-year-old? I was very curious. I told stories, I wrote stories, or I'd make little pictures, and I was very much, if I went to my grand's for the weekend, I would write about it, or in my own little way, probably older than that. But I was very much like, this is what I just did, and telling it to the next person. So that's definitely consistent throughout my life. happy but kind of shy smile. I feel like I'm a little more confident now. But anyway, it's a thread. The idea is that there's a thread. Identity is that thread that follows us throughout. And Simon Sinek, I don't know if you know him, but there's I can give you some links to some of his work. You just look him up. But Simon Sinek suggests that you look at who you were and how you were as a kid, like 5 to 9 year olds, before we got really influenced by the external world, by friends and school, and the idea of fitting in as opposed to belonging. And what did you do as a 5 year old? What did you like doing as a 5 year old? What made you happy? How were you in the world? So think about that. It's almost like core interests or core passions or core values. Another way to think of identity is if you take away everything external, who's left, right? Take away the labels, take away the specific clothes, take away the specific vehicle you drive or the house or the work. Like, take all of that away, plop yourself down in a foreign country with nothing to show who you are, not even language necessarily. And who's left? Like, who are you and how are you? There's I kind of want to go into it, but it's almost like a parallel conversation. But I have a problem with the American focus on identity, the identity as labels, especially being this age. People are like, well, how are you going to reinvent yourself when you retire? Who are you going to be? You know, now that you're not employed at this job and now you're not a mother or a grandmother, or what are your roles? What are your labels? I haven't had any of those labels anyways, so it's kind of irrelevant. My idea of identity is how are you? Think instead of wondering about the label and the box and I am a writer, I tell people I write, right? I paint, I travel. I don't have that like I'm a professor of creative writing in the fiction of blah blah blah. No. And I think that is a easier way of being. So you can reframe it for your characters is to you can even have them work out the difference, maybe some of them are super connected to their labels and their identities and the roles that they have as mother, as wife, as son, as boss, as co-worker, as grandmother, as teacher, as coach, all these different boxes. And then what happens to your characters if those boxes are taken away? Who's left? How are they going to move through the world? How are they going to think about themselves? I mean, it happens, right? I mean, there's stories of people in the financial crashes in New York City and the stock market, and people being so thrown by the loss of their money and the loss of their status and the loss of their labels and their identities that they kill themselves. That's sad. Makes a good story. Sorry if that happened to your family, but it's intense, right? For some people, it's really intense. They need that. Question is, does your character need that? Do you need that for your character or for any of the side characters or for your narrator? Think about that. There's a narrative approach, it's called, to identity. We were just talking about the psychological and the sociological definitions, I guess, of identity and self-identity. And there's also one called the narrative approach, and that is for us. We are writers. For us writers, it's what story we make of the events and our reactions in our life situations. Or rather, so that's for us as writers, but we take that and we put that into our characters, into our books. So what do our characters make of the events that happen in their lives? What do they carry from their past and what do they preemptively carry forward? What do they imagine for their future? And so it's all about their sense of identity, our characters, comes from the narrative they tell themselves. It's a good thing to think about. And it's something to actually, before I mention this, I think it would be a good time to stop and pause and to just take a moment and write about your character, your main character, and think about, just free write a page, their past. Like, what narrative, what story are they coming with, and what are they taking? What do they expect to take from that forward? I remember meeting someone a long time ago. I was probably in my 30s or something at a job, and she asked me, like, "What's your story?" And it so confused me, coming from small town England. It's just not, I don't know, it's just not how I think of things. But it was, they, I asked them, I said, I don't know how to answer that because, I'm 35, I've lived in all these different places, I do all these different things. I like to do this, I like to do that, I share this, I teach that, I work here, I play there, we, community. It just threw me. So again, unconventional lives or unconventional narratives, and what happens with that when you put that into a conventional setting. So you can play with that. Okay, so that's another thing to play with. So anyways, we are going to, oh, sorry, books we're going to track, these three. I'm just going to use three different novels this session and share them with you, share a couple of quotes, basically, little quotes and little examples. We have Stieg Larsson, The Girl in the Dragon Tattoo. We have Jeanette Winterson, Written on the Body, and one that I just finished, I just read recently, and I really like the character, and you'll find out why. Olga Tokarczuk, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. So there's the three I'm going to use in this week's PowerPoint and this week's class, of course. And I do want to say, remind you again to start thinking about other examples that you want to share or that you would like me to look at and would think would be really good for this experiment, right? Okay. So here we go. What we're going to do next is we're going to talk about how do our characters see themselves. So when you're working on your book, you've written, hopefully you've got a work in progress. Otherwise, this is all probably going to be a little hard because a lot of writing you're going to have to do. But I'm going to assume that you have a work in progress and you're going to be looking back at it with some of these questions in mind. And so you will get a copy of this so that you can look at it on your own time. So one thing you want to ask yourself is, how do our characters see themselves? How do I see myself going through the world? Like I've described myself to you, right? Some of the things. That's one question you want to ask. And another one you want to ask when you're rereading your work and you're revising is, how do friends, family, and absolute strangers interact with your character? How do they see them? How do they describe them? So we're going to go into this from different angles, but these are two great questions to start with for this week when we're talking more about identity. Okay. So, drink. So one thing I'd like to say is, what's the point to this? Like, why is it so important that we break stereotypes and tropes? So there's this quote from Richard Blanco. It was in the Writer's Chronicle years ago, 2016, I believe, 2017. And I used it. I have a master's degree in writing and publishing, and I basically, this topic was the topic of my thesis for that master's degree. And this is one of the quotes I use in that for explaining why I felt it important for people to understand how to write unconventional characters. When I see myself in the work of the other, I am reminded of the universality of art. That gives me the confidence to write my truth, believing that despite the particulars of my experiences, they are universal. And I think that's a lovely way of saying representation matters. right? Um, it's the aim of the narrative. We want our stories to be out there as writers, and as readers, we want to see ourselves in stories, right? That's the aim of the narrative. That's the aim of us telling stories. Is one of the things is to pay attention on our shared experiences, as well as point out some of the differences. We want to connect people. I do anyway, as a writer, and hopefully you do as a writer. So another quote that I'm just going to put in here real quick is from Michelle Sharp, and she wrote this in Poets and Writers magazine. And it was again the same kind of conversation about why is it important for us to show different lives. And there's the idea of representation, validation, feeling my life is validated by seeing it in other books and other characters, and permission to be that person, or permission for you as a writer to write the characters that you would really like to, but you held back because you felt they didn't fit, right? So the US literary market is starting to discover just how hungry readers are for outsider stories. She explained, Michelle Sharp, that is, explained how writers offer readers a new take on our shining, complex world, a glimpse of how it appears through their eyes. In a word, outsider stories open a door. They invite you inside. And I think that's a lovely way of us thinking about writing unconventional characters, right? Where there's a gift to it. It's not just making them memorable, but there's a motivation behind making them memorable. So one thing it's really important to pay attention to, and we will do this more throughout the course. We'll touch on these at all times. We'll keep going back in and out, basically, be threaded through. So readers gather clues from reading the books, and there's the linguistic, behavioral, and physical. There's names, syntax, pronouns, patterns of speech, choice of adjectives. Those are all kind of the linguistic things that we can do as writers to make sure our characters are who we want them to be and reflect themselves in the way that they speak and the way that we speak for them. There's behavioral, it's their actions and reactions, the work they do, the hobbies, the way they spend their time, their relationships, and the context. And then, of course, there's always the physical, the gender, sex, there's physical descriptions, mannerisms, the way someone walks, things like that. So I just mentioned this in passing now because, again, it's really worth noting this and remembering this for when you're looking back at how you've written your character. And as you build your characters out and develop them, you want to start paying attention to these three different avenues of making your characters richer and stronger and really vibrant. So one of the things we're gonna do now is we're gonna play with names, the power of names, right? Names and identity. How does the character what is the character's names? What the proper names are the first thing we notice, right? We want to know who it is who's talking to us. And it's very hard or different. It's very different to read a book when you don't know the narrator's name. Because even if the narrator doesn't tell us their name, say it's in the case of a first person book, or even otherwise, I'm sure there's other ways of doing that. But if we don't know the name of the character, we're constantly looking for it, right? And once we do know the name, it makes us go, huh? But it's unconscious, it's subconscious. We don't really think about it. So names and identities are really closely tied. There's some magic to them. And so there's the proper names, the ones we were given as kids, and then there's the names the way we think of ourselves, which means that's exactly the same for our characters. What were the names that they were given, and what do they call themselves? How do they have they changed their names? Have they condensed their names? Do they use nicknames? So and names have cultural expectations, right? So here's a quote from Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. And I'm not going to try to say her name again. I apologize. I have no idea how to say her last name. But anyways, so the main character here, again, we go into that story starts, and it oddly enough, it's only around page 18 that this text, this little bit comes up. So the first 18 pages, we don't know who's talking to us. There's no actual physical description of herself. There's just what she's doing. And here we go. What a lack of imagination it is to have official first names and surnames. No one ever remembers them. They're so divorced from the person and so banal that they don't remind us of them at all. What's more, each generation has its own trends, and suddenly everyone's named Magdalena, Patrick, or, God forbid, Janina, which is kind of a bit of a clue that Janina might be her name. Choosing a name. Maybe your character needs to re-choose a name. And her perspective on names is interesting. I mean, that alone tells us quite a bit about the character. Anyway, carrying on. Unfortunately, I couldn't choose a suitable name for myself. I think my real name is Amelia or Joanna. Sometimes I think it's something like Ermtrude too, or Bellona or Medea. So names have a power. Names, think about the power of names. Think about the power of nicknames. Your name. How do you sit with your name? Is it one that you liked? Is it one that kids kind of tweaked when you were at school and you didn't like? Or gave you a nickname that you stuck with? So, names, identity. So this is the first official writing prompt for us. And proper names. We're going to take 10 minutes. So after this, you can just pause the video and keep the screen up. Write a list of current names in your book or short story. Like, what names have you picked for all the different characters? Just write them out. I mean, you can look at your screen and find them. Write a list of another 5 names you're drawn to, like that you haven't used necessarily, but names that you're drawn to and you would like to use at some point. And then afterwards, if this was a live group or if we're doing like a shared assignments place online somewhere, one of the platforms, I was going to say, out of the 5 names that you're drawn to, pick one of them, tell us that, and we will all give you what we picture. Like the names, Janina of the quote I just gave you. Like, who do you picture when you hear that name? Who do you picture when someone brings up the name, I don't know, Billy? It's the name of my dog. Um, who do you picture when you think of the name Billy, when you're told the name is Billy? Not without the spelling. So that's another one. It's like Billy spelled with an IE and Billy spelled with a Y have different connotations to an Anglo-Westerner like myself. So this is just a little quick prompt. Take 10 minutes or more and do those 3 things, and then we'll come back to you. Have a drink. So now we've done that, kind of leading on to the idea of the names. I'm going to refer back to the book Jeanette Winterson, Written on the Body. Like I said, that narrator did not have a name and was also ungendered throughout. And so it's a fascinating book. I've actually written a few articles about it, per se, in way more detail than we're going into today, but I can share the links to those if you want. And when Jeanette Winterson was asked why she didn't use a name, why she didn't use a gender identity, and left it up to us, the readers, to put that information in for ourselves. This is what she said. I wanted to have someone who is passionate, who is sexy, but who is also vulnerable, subject to the whims and misrules of the world. A narrator that men and women could identify with. I don't know. What do you think about that? I think it's kind of fascinating. And I hadn't realized, but my first 2 novels did something similar unconsciously. This I found out and started looking into and becoming conscious of this in 2017 when I was doing the master's degree. My books came out in like 2010, 2012, 2014, the first three. And they, I'd done something similar in that the first one was ungendered. You didn't really know, I mean, there were clues both ways all the way through. You didn't really know who the narrator was, the first person, and the clues or the way people reacted and didn't react, and the names and all of these things fed into what's now this course and other stuff. So just a fascinating way of thinking about the power of names. Okay. So examples of how Jeanette Winterson um, described a character that is essentially ungendered and unnamed. This is how the narrator describe themselves. A few examples for you. Who do I think I am? Sir Lancelot? With Jacqueline, I settled into a parody of the sporting colonel, the tweedy cove with the line-up trophies. I visited her in the depths of winter, muffled from head to foot, stamping rushes of snow from my boots like a character from Anna Karenina. Maybe it's my face. Maybe I look like a doormat today. So a whole range of different ways of describing themselves, and the book is just full of them. If you haven't read the book for a long time or never read it, it's short. It's more like a novella, but it's super rich. It's so poetic, and so many of the descriptions of how the narrator describes themselves, and especially in relation to this girlfriend, this beloved, it's fascinating, actually, super fascinating. Um, Another way of tackling the idea of how the narrators describe themselves or think of themselves is who they compare themselves to. And so in Written on the Body, some of the comparisons were Cassandra, Christopher Robin, Alice in Wonderland, Alice Toklas, Rumpelstiltskin, Lauren Bacall. There's a whole range. And I think that's kind of a great little side way of making people picture your character, right? And it can be, as you can see, you can be really unconventional, or you can use pop culture, or lots of different things, which leads us into the next prompt, the next writing exercise. Comparisons, questions. I want you to look at these questions, pause the video, and just answer them in your own time. Who does your narrator or protagonist compare themselves to? List 5 figures from literature, historical mythology, cinema, music, whatever you like, politics, whatever works for you, like, or for your character. Think of 5 characters, 5 figures that your character, if in conversation, would compare themselves to, and make a little list for yourself. And if we were alive, we were having this conversation, I'd want you to explain and just think about why. Think about why each of those. Okay, so pause the video. Beep. The next book we're going to talk about, or use some examples from, is Stieg Larsson. And the Chicago Tribune, when it came out, wrote, "Remarkable. Like a blast of cold, fresh air to read, it features at its center 2 unique and fascinating characters, a disgraced financial journalist and the absolutely marvelous 24-year-old Lisbeth Salander, a computer hacking Pippi Longstocking with pierced eyebrows and a survival instinct that should scare anyone who gets in her way." That's a pretty good description. That's a remarkable character. That is someone, I don't know if you've read the book. I believe it's been made into movies, but I don't watch movies, so that doesn't work for me. But yes, Lisbeth Salander was or is a character that is just so extremely unconventional that I think is taking our examples to the extreme, right? It really is. And again, the wider the range of examples, Like, I'd like you to look at your books and look at things around your house and think of books that you've liked, and even just like note down some of the characters that you remember, and then go to that book and work out why. Like, what was it about that character's sense of identity, sense self-description, how others described that character. Really think about the the way that that character was so unconventional or stunning that you've never forgotten them. Okay, so let's see. So the great thing about Elizabeth Salander was that her character really challenged social scripts, social stereotypes of what a 24-year-old in Sweden should look like and should do. And challenges behaviors. She challenged like how her reactions, how she reacted to things, often with violence, how she and subterfuge, how she acted and how she moved through the world, how she claimed space, how she could hide in space. She was just remarkable, strong, unique, deeply retaliatory character, revengeful. I mean, in theory, all the things that we're not meant to make female characters, especially young female characters, be, right? Nope. She was hard-headed, she was strong, she knew herself, and unforgettable. So some of the things that Larson did that made her so unforgettable, that we can then use some of these extremes because he's given us permission to go as far out as we like and to bring it back in. So some of the things that we can do was how she dressed. So she had tattoos, piercings, gothic clothes, how she behaved, reticent, withdrawn, really didn't express herself to people, didn't trust people. And she was constantly misinterpreted, dismissed, judged, but she was fascinating and fiery. And I think that gives us permission as writers to really to make our character whoever we want them to be, right? We can go as far as we want, or we can just use some of these tools, some of these hints, make them just hints as opposed to extreme examples. We can use some of the things that, like these books that we've just used, we can use some of those ideas of the proper names or the what is it, how the narrator and written on the body describe themselves and comparisons, who they compared themselves to. And then for this example of how Elizabeth Sanders sees herself. And I mean, some of her statements about herself, because this wasn't her book, like this wasn't written in her mind, and there's really no internal monologues for Elizabeth. But some of the statements she came out with was like, I'm insane. I'm fucking insane. That's why this works. I have a high metabolism. I can't put on weight. I'm stacked only in the sense that two pancakes are a stack. I mean, she has a sense of humor and she's very visual. Like those three things tell us about her body and about the way she thinks of herself and the way she thinks about how others see her too. So fascinating, good examples for us to play with. And then also we can have, I'm going to, couple of quotes here from how others described Elizabeth. Um, Michael Bloomquist, the journalist that was mentioned earlier in the Chicago Tribune, um, first met Elizabeth and described her as this. She was a pale, skinny young woman who looked like an anorexic teenager. She had short, cropped hair, dyed pitch black, and a piercing through her left eyebrow. She was wearing a black leather jacket, a black t-shirt with some punk rock band's logo, black jeans, and heavy boots. And that was the first impression. And that alone, if you can describe your character in 4 lines like that, the initial impression of your character, that would be great. And that would be a great little side prompt. I hadn't put it as a prompt for us, but that'd be a great thing for us to do with your characters, if you have time. But then Michael's impression quickly shifts to he had the feeling he was dealing with a very fragile person, but at the same time, someone who possessed a core of absolute steel. And again, 2 lines really described the complexity of Elizabeth, right? Again, great example for us to use for our own characters. And then, as her boss explains, because Elizabeth works as a computer hacker security for someone, Armansky. As her boss explains, the girl was an extreme misfit, but Armansky had never had a better researcher. The problem was that she was visually so provocative that anyone who looked at her immediately formed a negative opinion of her. Those three things are just killer. You have to go back to the slide. Okay, so the last prompt for us today is misunderstandings. With Lisbeth in mind, I want you to look at your character and just think about some of the questions here. How is your character misunderstood or underestimated? Those would be great for being unconventional. Like we have maybe your character's seemingly conventional, but there's other stuff to her or him underneath. And how are they underestimated? How are they misunderstood? Can you add something, a detail that tells this reader of hidden depths, traumas, desires, passions, ways of thinking, internal monologues? Just play with that idea, okay? And then, once you played with that idea a little bit, I'd like you to write a brand new dialogue or internal monologue written from their unique, unfiltered perspective that will show the reader this underlying discrepancy, the difference between the external and the internal. And I think those are I put down just for 10 minutes for in the class, we do this for 10 minutes and then we talk about it afterwards, okay? But I think as this is the last prompt for today, for this week, for week one, think about the identity and all of these different concepts of identity and how the character's identity is formed and how other people react to that identity and self-identity, okay? And next week, we're going to actually for homework assignments, sorry, take 5 pages of your current work in progress and go through each of these ideas and see what you can change, develop, edit, tweak, maybe restart, write again, you know. And the focus next week is going to be on context. And this is a photo of basically where I grew up. And the lady in the blue dress is what I should look like and what I should be doing if I'd stayed in that context as a middle-class English white woman in small town England, and I'm not. So that is the context. Put me now in that context. I stand out. I'm very misunderstood or actually I'm accepted now, to be honest, better than I was at a younger age. But anyways, so next week we're going to talk about context. And I would like to ask you to bring in other books or examples and send them either to me or bring them to the group. We'll have one of these once a week for the next 8 weeks. Okay. So there you go. Stop sharing. We're going to finish with that. So there you go. Think about those things and play with them. I hope they give you some ideas and give you some good prompts and that you have fun. Okay. I'll see you soon. And no. Ding, ding, ding. Stop recording.